That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day became a story the whole community tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind struggle and silence, there are still human hearts. The rain began as a whisper against the cracked windows of the old orphanage on the edge of town, but by dawn it had swollen into a relentless roar. Thunder cracked like brittle bones, shaking the thin walls where Eliza huddled under a threadbare blanket. She was 16, an orphan since the fire that claimed her parents when she was 8, a blaze that left her with scars on her arms and a deeper one etched into her soul. The other kids called her Ghost Girl, whispering that she brought bad luck, their taunts echoing in the dim hallways like distant echoes of that long-ago night. Eliza kept her head down, her dark hair falling like a curtain over eyes that had learned to watch the world without being seen. She moved through life like a shadow, avoiding the rough shoves in the lunch line, the snickers behind her back, the way the matron's gaze slid past her as if she were invisible. Guilt gnawed at her constantly, not for surviving the fire, but for the fleeting thought she'd had that night, wishing for escape from her family's endless arguments. It was a child's foolish prayer, but it haunted her, making her believe she deserved the isolation. Outside, the storm battered the town, turning streets into rivers of mud and debris. The local hospital, a squat brick building on Elm Street, stood like a beacon amid the chaos, its fluorescent lights cutting through the grey sheets of rain. Inside, the air was thick with the sharp tang of antiseptic, mingling with the faint metallic scent of worry that clung to every corner. Nurses moved in quiet rhythm, their scrubs whispering against the linoleum floors, while monitors beeped softly in the dim glow of the ER. It was the night shift's weary hour, when fatigue settled into bones like an unwelcome guest, and the world outside felt a universe away. Eliza had no reason to be out in such weather. The orphanage rules were clear: stay inside during storms. But hunger had driven her, a gnawing ache from skipping dinner to avoid the bullies' jeers. She slipped out the back door, pulling her hoodie tight against the wind that whipped icy needles across her face. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional flash of lightning illuminating abandoned cars, half submerged in floodwater. Her sneakers squelched through puddles that rose to her ankles, the cold seeping up her legs like regret. She aimed for the corner store a few blocks away, but the storm's fury grew, trees bending low as if bowing to an unseen force. Thunder rolled again, closer now, vibrating through her chest and quickening her heartbeat to a frantic drum. Halfway there, a cry pierced the downpour, not human, but mechanical, a car's horn blaring in distress. Eliza froze, rain streaming down her face, blurring her vision. Ahead, on the slick road leading to the hospital, a sedan had skidded into a ditch, its headlights flickering weakly like dying stars. The driver's door hung open, and from within came labored breaths, ragged and pained. Eliza's instinct was to run, keep moving, stay unseen, as she always did. But something in that sound, raw and vulnerable, tugged at the scar tissue of her past. She thought of her mother's final gasps in the smoke-filled house, the way no one had come running then. Her hands trembled as she approached, the wind howling in her ears, carrying the salty bite of ozone. The driver was a woman in her 30s, her nurse's scrubs soaked and clinging to her swollen belly. She clutched the steering wheel, face pale and slick with sweat and rain, her breaths coming in sharp, involuntary gasps. "Help!" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "The baby. It's coming. Too soon." Eliza's heart lurched. She wasn't trained for this, knew nothing of births or emergencies, but the woman's eyes, wide with terror, mirrored the fear Eliza had buried deep. No one else was around. The rain had driven everyone indoors. Society saw nurses like this woman as pillars of strength, unflappable in crisis. But here she was, reduced to fragility, misunderstood by a world that expected heroes without breaks. Eliza hesitated, water dripping from her lashes, her mind racing through the guilt of past inaction. The orphanage had taught her to fend for herself, to ignore others' pain lest it drag her under. But this was different. The woman's hand reached out trembling, and Eliza took it without thinking, feeling the warmth of life pulsing through her palm despite the chill. "The hospital's just up the road," Eliza said, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her gut. "Can you walk?" The nurse nodded weakly, but as she shifted, a sharp cry escaped her lips, and a gush of fluid darkened the seat. The baby was coming now, insistent, demanding entry into the world amid the chaos. With adrenaline surging like fire in her veins, Eliza helped the woman out of the car, supporting her weight as they stumbled toward the hospital. The rain lashed at them, turning their steps into a desperate dance on the flooded sidewalk. Each contraction made the nurse buckle, her grip tightening like a vice on Eliza's arm, nails digging into skin. Eliza's breath came in short bursts, matching the woman's, the storm's roar, drowning out her own rising panic. Flashes of lightning illuminated their path, casting long shadows that seemed to chase them. "Why me?" Eliza thought, her mind flashing to the bully's laughter, the matron's indifference. She was no one, a ghost. Yet here she was, bearing this stranger's burden, her moral core refusing to let go. They reached the hospital entrance just as another thunderclap shook the ground. The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, spilling warm, sterile air over them like a hesitant embrace. Inside, the lobby was hushed, a few night shift staff glancing up from their stations. The nurse collapsed against Eliza, whispering, "Thank you. I thought we'd never make it." But the danger wasn't over. The storm had knocked out power in parts of the building, backup generators humming uncertainly, lights flickering like the woman's faltering strength. Eliza guided her toward the ER desk, her soaked clothes dripping pools on the tile, heart pounding with the weight of what she'd just done and what might still come. In that moment, as alarms began to beep faintly from the labor ward, Eliza felt the first stirrings of something unfamiliar. Purpose. The world outside judged her as broken, overlooked, but in the quiet heroism of that rain-soaked rescue, she had stepped into the light, if only for a breath. The nurse's hand squeezed hers again, a silent plea amid the beeping monitors and the storm's distant rage. Little did Eliza know. This act would unravel the threads of misunderstanding that bound not just her life, but the entire community's hidden compassions. The fluorescent lights above the ER desk buzzed faintly, casting a sterile pallor over the faces of the night shift staff. Rain hammered against the tall windows like impatient fingers, while the scent of wet earth seeped in from outside, clashing with the pervasive antiseptic tang that coated every breath. Eliza's sneakers left muddy trails on the linoleum, her hoodie heavy with water that dripped steadily onto the floor. The nurse, her name tag read Maria, leaned heavily against her, breaths shallow and erratic, each one punctuated by a wince that twisted her features. Alarms from distant monitors echoed softly, a chorus of urgency in the otherwise hushed lobby. A receptionist looked up from her clipboard, her eyes widening behind wire-rimmed glasses. "What happened?" she asked, voice calm but edged with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen too many storms, both literal and figurative. Eliza swallowed, her throat tight, words tumbling out in a rush. "Car accident. In the rain. She's in labor. Early." Maria nodded weakly, her hand still clutching Eliza's arm as if it were the only anchor in the swelling tide of pain. The receptionist hit a button, and within seconds, 2 orderlies appeared, wheeling a gurney with swift, synchronized movements. They eased Maria onto it, her soaked scrubs leaving dark stains on the crisp sheets. Eliza stepped back, intending to fade into the shadows near the vending machines, her role in this drama already feeling like an intrusion. She wasn't family, wasn't staff, just a soaked orphan who'd stumbled into something far beyond her grasp. But Maria's eyes found hers again, pleading, "Stay, please." The word hung in the air, simple yet weighted, pulling at the frayed edges of Eliza's resolve. She nodded, heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird, and followed as the gurney rolled toward the labor ward. The hallways stretched long and narrow, lined with closed doors that muffled the soft beeps of life support machines. The storm's fury rattled the building, windows vibrating with each gust, while emergency lights flickered intermittently, painting the walls in stuttering shadows. Nurses in colorful scrubs, blues and greens like faded ocean waves, moved with quiet purpose, their footsteps a soft patter against the tile. To the outside world, hospitals like this were fortresses of competence, places where miracles happened under bright lights and steady hands. But Eliza saw the cracks, the weary slump in a doctor's shoulders as he reviewed charts by lamplight. The way a janitor paused to rub his eyes during his endless circuit. Society praised these healers as infallible. Yet here, in the dim hours before dawn, they were just people, tired, human, carrying the invisible burdens of lives saved and lost. They burst into the labor room, a space alive with controlled chaos. The head nurse, a sturdy woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and an embroidered pin glinting on her collar, took one look at Maria and sprang into action. "Power's unstable. Generators holding, but we can't wait for full backup," she said, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the fatigue etched into the lines around her eyes. Doctors hovered nearby, one adjusting an IV stand while another checked monitors that displayed Maria's vitals in jagged green lines. The air hummed with the low whir of equipment, undercut by the rain's relentless drum on the roof. Eliza hovered by the door, feeling out of place amid the flurry, her muddy clothes a stark contrast to the crisp uniforms. She watched as they worked, hands moving with a rhythm born of countless shifts, gloved fingers probing, voices murmuring reassurances. Maria's contractions intensified, her body arching against the bed, sweat beading on her forehead despite the room's chill. "I can't. It's too fast," she gasped, her grip seeking Eliza's hand once more. Eliza knelt beside her, the cold tile seeping through her jeans, and squeezed back. In that touch, memories flooded unbidden. The orphanage's cold nights, the way she'd curl into herself after the bully's taunts, wishing for someone, anyone, to hold on. The emotional turn came like a sudden contraction itself. As Maria cried out, the head nurse glanced at Eliza, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. "You're the one who brought her in? In this storm?" Eliza nodded, averting her eyes, expecting dismissal, but the nurse's voice held no judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement. Brave, most would have kept walking. Outside, the world misjudged these women, the nurses who bandaged wounds by day and battled their own doubts by night. They were seen as tough exteriors, hiding mechanical efficiency, yet Eliza glimpsed the compassion beneath. The way the head nurse brushed a damp strand from Maria's face, her touch lingering like a mother's, tension coiled tighter as the power flickered again, plunging the room into momentary darkness before the generators kicked in with a groan. Monitors reset with frantic beeps, and Maria's screams sharpened, echoing off the walls. "The baby's crowning! Push, Maria, now!" the doctor urged, his forehead slick with effort. Eliza's pulse raced, adrenaline sharpening her senses, the metallic scent of blood mingling with antiseptic, the heat radiating from Maria's straining body, the distant thunder that mirrored the chaos within. She whispered encouragements, words she'd never spoken to herself. "You're strong. You've got this." each one chipping at the guilt she'd carried like a stone in her chest. "Why help?" her mind whispered. "You're invisible. Stay that way." But the vulnerability before her, the tiny life fighting to emerge amid the storm, mirrored her own buried wounds, the child she'd been, overlooked and alone. Minutes stretched into an eternity of labored breaths and urgent commands. The head nurse guided Eliza's hands to support Maria's back, her own trembling slightly from the strain. "Hold her steady," she instructed, and in that shared effort, Eliza felt the first thread of connection weave between them. Maria's cries peaked, raw and primal, until, with a final shuddering push, the room filled with the baby's first wail, piercing and triumphant. The doctor lifted the infant, tiny and slick, wrapping it in a warmed blanket as the team exhaled collectively, the air thick with relief. Maria reached for her child, tears mixing with sweat, and pulled Eliza closer. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice breaking. The head nurse placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder, a gesture warm against the room's cooling air. In the quiet that followed, as the storm began to ebb outside, Eliza realized the judgment she'd internalized, the belief that her past made her unworthy, was echoed in how the world viewed these healers, stoic saviors, never faltering. Yet here, in the beeping hush, she saw their humanity, fragile and fierce, much like her own emerging courage, as the first light of dawn filtered through the rain-streaked windows. Casting a soft glow over the exhausted faces, Eliza sat back, her hands still tingling from the grip. The baby nursed quietly at Maria's breast, a small miracle born of storm and strangers' kindness. Little did she know, whispers of this night were already spreading through the hospital's veins, the night shift tales that would summon a community from the shadows, ready to honor the overlooked heart that had dared to step forward. The dawn light crept tentatively into the labor room, painting the walls in muted grays and golds, as if the storm had exhausted itself and left the world to heal in silence. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers, then to the rhythmic suckling that filled the space with a fragile peace. Maria cradled her daughter, her face a map of exhaustion and wonder, the lines around her eyes deepening with each weary blink. The air still carried the faint, coppery trace of blood, now overlaid by the warmer scent of fresh linens as a nurse adjusted the blankets. Eliza remained by the bedside, her own body heavy with the night's toll, soggy clothes clinging like a second skin, muscles aching from the hours of tension. She watched the infant's tiny fists wave, a spark of life that seemed to mock the shadows of her own past. The head nurse, whose name was Clara, moved with quiet efficiency, checking Maria's vitals on the monitor that beeped steadily, its green glow reflecting in her steady gaze. "She's stable," Clara murmured, her voice a low anchor amid the fading echoes of thunder outside. "Both of them. You did good bringing her in when you did." Eliza met her eyes briefly, then looked away, the praise landing like an unfamiliar weight on her chest. Good. She was no hero. She'd only reacted, pulled by the same invisible thread that had kept her alive through orphanage nights of isolation. The bullies' voices echoed in her mind. Ghost girl, bad luck, reminding her that acts like this only invited more pain, more reasons to be pushed aside. But the respite was fleeting. A low rumble from the generators vibrated through the floor, and the lights overhead dimmed once more, casting long shadows that danced across the room like uneasy specters. Alarms pierced the quiet, sharp and insistent, from corridors away. Clara's hand paused on the IV line, her expression tightening. "Not again," she whispered, exchanging a glance with the doctor, who had lingered to monitor the newborn. Outside, the storm's remnants lashed the building, wind howling through cracks in the structure, rattling IV poles, and sending a chill draft snaking under the door. The power fluctuations weren't just inconvenient. In a hospital teetering on the edge of crisis, they were a threat, a reminder of how thin the line was between order and chaos. Maria shifted, wincing as she held the baby closer. "What's happening?" Her voice was hoarse, laced with the fresh fear of a new mother in an unstable world. Eliza's heart quickened, her pulse echoing the erratic beeps around them. She wanted to slip away now, to vanish before the questions came. Who are you? Why were you out there? But Maria's plea from earlier held her fast. Instead, she stood, peering through the small window into the hallway. Nurses hurried past, their footsteps clipped, voices murmuring in urgent clusters. The outside world saw hospital staff as unbreakable, their compassion a given. But Eliza glimpsed the strain, a young orderly rubbing his temples, an older doctor pausing to lean against the wall, breath coming in shallow bursts. These were the quiet heroes, judged by society as mere functionaries, yet carrying the weight of lives on frayed nerves. Tension escalated as Clara stepped out briefly, returning with a portable oxygen tank and a flashlight, her embroidered pin catching the dim light, a small emblem of the staff's unspoken bond. "Flooding's worsening," she explained, her tone measured but her hands betraying a slight tremor as she secured the tank. "Backup's straining. We might lose non-essentials. The NICU's on alert and we're short-staffed with the roads out." Maria's face paled, her free hand clutching the bedsheet, knuckles whitening. The baby stirred, fussing at the shift in her mother's tension, and Eliza instinctively reached out, adjusting the blanket with a gentleness she rarely afforded herself. In that touch, her own guilt resurfaced. The fire's smoke, the arguments she'd wished away, now mirrored in this fragile family, vulnerable to forces beyond control. The moral danger unfolded slowly, like the rising floodwaters Eliza had waded through earlier. Word of the delivery had spread through the night shift like a whisper on the wind, pulling staff from their stations. A cluster gathered outside the door, 2 doctors in rumpled white coats, a janitor with a mop paused mid-stride, even the receptionist from the lobby, her glasses fogged from the hurried walk. They peered in, not with intrusion, but with a shared relief that softened their features. Yet beneath it lay the confrontation Eliza dreaded, her presence, unexplained, drawing eyes that might soon turn to judgment. "That girl. She's not staff," someone murmured, the words carrying on the draft. Eliza's breath hitched, adrenaline surging anew, hot and insistent, as if the storm had seeped into her veins. Clara noticed, placing a steadying hand on Eliza's arm. "She's the one who got Maria here, through the worst of it." The group fell silent, the weight of that truth settling like dew on the air. But the power flickered again, plunging the room into near darkness, the baby's monitor emitting a frantic whine before stabilizing. Maria gasped, pulling the infant tight, and Eliza's determination hardened against the fear. She couldn't leave now. The act that had started as instinct had woven her into this web, her moral core refusing to unravel. The hallway light stuttered back on, but the unease lingered, the building groaning under the storm's assault. As minutes blurred into a haze of checks and reassurances, Eliza felt the rising confrontation within herself, the pull to flee versus the anchor of purpose, the staff's compassion, so often overlooked by a society that viewed them as cogs in a machine, now extended tentatively toward her, their quiet nods a bridge across the isolation she'd known. Outside, rain pattered softer now, but the flood's threat loomed, sirens wailing faintly in the distance as emergency crews battled the elements. Eliza's hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the adrenaline's ebb, revealing the depth of her resolve. In this escalating peril, where every beep and flicker tested the hospital's fragile humanity, she stood firm, unaware that this night of quiet heroism was summoning a larger tide, one that would flood the lobby with unexpected allies. The emotional micro-reactions played out in the room's hush. Clara's subtle exhale of relief as the monitors steadied, Maria's tear-streaked smile as she kissed the baby's forehead, Eliza's heartbeat slowing to match the infant's breaths. Yet danger persisted. A low undercurrent as reports filtered in of power outages spreading, isolating wards and straining resources. Eliza whispered to Maria, "We'll get through this," the words tasting foreign on her tongue, born from a place she'd long kept buried. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The storm's remnants clung to the hospital like a shroud, the wind now a persistent moan that rattled the window frames, carrying the earthy scent of soaked soil through the vents. Inside the labor room, the air grew thicker, laced with the sharp tang of emergency protocols, rubber gloves snapping into place, the faint ozone from flickering electronics. Maria lay propped against pillows, her newborn daughter swaddled in her arms, but her face bore the pallor of renewed worry, eyes darting to the monitor as its beeps quickened erratically. Eliza stood sentinel by the bed, her fingers still intertwined with Maria's. The warmth of that connection, a fragile bulwark against the encroaching chill. The baby's soft gurgles provided a counterpoint to the tension, innocent sounds that amplified the room's fragility, each one a reminder of what hung in the balance. Clara, the head nurse, paced the perimeter, her embroidered pin, a small silver stethoscope, catching the intermittent light as she coordinated with the team via a handheld radio. Static crackled, voices overlapping in clipped urgency. Ward 3's down, reroute oxygen to maternity. Her hands, usually steady, betrayed a subtle tremor as she adjusted the IV drip, the needle's glint sharp in the dimness. Eliza watched, her own pulse sinking with the chaos, a low thrum of adrenaline that sharpened every sense, the cool sweat beading on her neck, the distant drip of water leaking from a ceiling tile, the way Maria's breath hitched with each contraction's aftershock. Guilt twisted in Eliza's gut, not for the fire of her past, but for this moment, her presence here, drawing attention to a world she'd always skirted, now threatening to pull her deeper into the storm's maw. The power surged once more, lights humming back to life with a reluctant buzz, but the relief was short-lived. Alarms wailed from the hallway, a piercing cascade that summoned more staff. Nurses with stethoscopes swinging like pendulums, doctors in half-buttoned coats, their faces etched with the quiet heroism that society often overlooked. They were the backbone of this place, misjudged as mere attendants to suffering, yet their compassion ran deep, forged in nights like this, where exhaustion warred with duty. One young nurse, her scrubs rumpled from a double shift, paused at the door, eyes widening at the sight of the newborn. "She's here? Already?" Her voice held awe, but beneath it lurked fear, the moral conflict of limited resources in a building on the brink. Eliza felt the weight of their gazes shift toward her, a subtle confrontation building like the floodwaters outside. Who was this drenched girl, hovering like a shadow amid their ranks? Whispers rippled, orphaned from the edge of town. Heard she brought Maria in. The words carried no malice, but they stirred Eliza's determination, laced with fear, fear of exposure, of the bully's taunts manifesting in adult indifference, of her guilt surfacing to label her unworthy. She squeezed Maria's hand tighter, the pressure grounding her as adrenaline coursed hot through her veins. "We need to move her to a safer room," Clara directed, her tone brooking no argument, though her eyes flicked to Eliza with an unspoken plea for help. The head nurse's toughness masked a deeper empathy, the kind that saw beyond uniforms to the human core, much like Eliza's own hidden resolve. They prepared to transfer Maria, wheeling the bed with careful precision down the corridor, where emergency lights cast elongated shadows that twisted like doubts. The hallway pulsed with activity, carts clattering, feet shuffling in hurried rhythm, the air heavy with the sterile bite of disinfectants, now mingled with the musty intrusion of rain-soaked walls. Eliza walked alongside, supporting the IV stand, her sneakers silent on the tile, heart pounding with the escalation of it all. Outside, through the narrow windows, floodlights from emergency vehicles pierced the gloom, their blue and red pulses syncing with her racing thoughts. Sirens wailed closer, not for Maria, but for the broader crisis. The town isolated, roads impassable, the hospital a lone island in the deluge. As they turned a corner, the building shuddered, a deep groan echoing from the foundations as another power dip plunged sections into darkness. Backup lanterns flared to life, their yellow glow harsh and unforgiving, illuminating faces slick with perspiration. Maria whimpered, clutching the baby closer, her body trembling from the effort of birth and the fresh wave of contractions. Afterbirth complications. The doctor murmured, his voice low to avoid panic. Eliza's breath caught, adrenaline spiking into full-blown terror. She imagined the infant's cries silenced by failure, mirroring the silence that had swallowed her family years ago. Guilt clawed at her. Why hadn't she stayed hidden? But determination overrode it, her moral wound from the past fueling a quiet fire. She wouldn't let this family fracture, not when she glimpsed their shared vulnerability. The team halted in a dimly lit alcove, Clara barking orders into the radio while others formed a human chain to stabilize the bed. "Hold steady, generators are maxed." A retaliation from the storm seemed personal now, the wind battering the exterior walls with renewed fury, dislodging debris that pattered against the glass like accusatory stones. Eliza's hands shook as she helped reposition Maria, feeling the heat of fever rising from her skin, the sticky warmth of sweat under her palms. Fear coiled in her chest, tight and unyielding, but she whispered reassurances, her voice a steady thread amid the fray. "Breathe with me. In and out." Maria's eyes locked on hers, gratitude mingling with pain, a silent acknowledgement of the compassion Eliza had always carried, buried beneath layers of isolation. In this rising peril, the hospital's misunderstood heart revealed itself, the staff's apparent stoicism cracking to show raw humanity, their hands linking in a chain of support that extended to Eliza. A doctor, his coat sleeves rolled up to reveal tattooed forearms from a life before medicine, nodded at her. "You're holding up better than some of us." The words, simple, chipped at her defenses, stirring the emotional micro-reactions. A nurse's subtle smile through fatigue, Clara's hand brushing Eliza's in passing, warm and affirming. Yet the danger mounted. Reports crackling over the radio of flooding in the lower levels, evacuations stalled by the weather. Eliza's determination hardened, adrenaline masking the guilt that whispered she didn't belong, propelling her forward into the moral danger of commitment. The alcove felt smaller now, walls closing in with the press of bodies and the storm's roar. Maria's labored breaths grew shallower, the babies fussing sharper, and Eliza positioned herself at the bed's head, stroking damp hair from Maria's forehead. The touch evoked her own lost mother, the arguments silenced by flame, and tears pricked Eliza's eyes, unbidden, hot. Outside, thunder rumbled like a warning, but within, the quiet heroism persisted, a slow burn defiance against the chaos. As the lights stabilized once more, flickering back to life, Eliza realized this escalation wasn't just physical. It was a confrontation with her past, a test of whether her overlooked soul could forge bonds in the heart of crisis. The team's efforts intensified, injecting medications with precise haste, monitoring vitals that danced on the edge of alarm. Eliza remained, her presence a quiet anchor, the fear and guilt transforming into resolve. In the beeping hush, Amid the sensory onslaught of chill drafts and urgent murmurs, she glimpsed redemption, not grand, but communal, woven from the unexpected humanity of these healers, who saw her not as a ghost, but as kin in the struggle. The storm raged on, but so did they, hearts beating in defiant unison. The alcove's yellow lantern light wavered like a candle in the draught, casting flickering patterns on the faces gathered there, each one etched with the quiet strain of endurance. The air hung heavy, saturated with the sharp sting of antiseptic and the underlying mustiness of water seeping through the walls, a reminder that the storm's retaliation was far from over. Maria's breaths came in ragged intervals, her body trembling under the thin sheet as the afterbirth complications tightened their grip. Fever rising, blood pressure spiking in erratic waves on the portable monitor. The baby's cries sharpened into insistent wails, piercing the confined space like fragile accusations, pulling at the frayed edges of everyone's resolve. Eliza knelt beside the bed, her hand steady on Maria's forehead, feeling the unnatural heat radiate through her palm, a stark contrast to the chill that clawed at her own soaked clothes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a thunderclap echoing the one outside, adrenaline surging in hot pulses that made her fingers tingle. Clara's voice cut through the static-laced radio chatter, low and commanding, yet laced with an undercurrent of weariness. "Stabilize the drip, push the fluids now." Her hands moved with practiced grace, but Eliza caught the subtle micro-reaction. A brief pause, a deepening of the furrow between her brows, as if the weight of too many such nights pressed down harder than usual. The head nurse's embroidered pin gleamed faintly, a symbol of the hierarchy that bound them. Nurses like her at the core, doctors orbiting with their expertise, staff weaving the threads of care. Society viewed them as unyielding sentinels, their compassion a professional mask. But here, in the stutter of emergency lights, Eliza saw the truth. These were souls tempered by loss. Their toughness, a veil over hearts that bled quietly for every patient they couldn't fully save. The building groaned again, a deep vibration traveling up from the flooded lower levels, and water trickled visibly along the baseboards, pooling in shallow reflections of the lanterns. Alarms blared from adjacent wards, a cacophony that summoned more figures into the corridor. Orderlies with flashlights, a cluster of nurses whose footsteps echoed like hesitant heartbeats on the tile. Eliza's fear coiled tighter, a moral vice squeezing her chest. She was no healer, just a shadow from the orphanage fringes, her past guilt whispering that her involvement only invited disaster. "Why stay?" the voice urged, memories of the fire's roar flashing unbidden, the smoke choking her lungs, her silent wish for escape now twisted into this moment's peril. But Maria's grip on her arm anchored her, the nurse's eyes fluttering open, wide with a vulnerability that mirrored Eliza's own buried wounds. "Don't go," Maria murmured, her voice a threadbare plea, the baby squirming against her chest as if sensing the fragility. Tension escalated as the radio crackled with dire updates. "Basement pumps failing. Evacuate non-critical to upper floors." Clara's face hardened, but her hand lingered on Eliza's shoulder, a compassionate press that betrayed the group's hidden empathy. "We can't move her yet, not stable." The doctor, sleeves still rolled, knelt to assess, his breath warm and steady against the cool air, but his eyes betrayed the conflict, the ethical bind of rationing care in crisis, the quiet heroism of choosing who to fight for hardest. Eliza's adrenaline sharpened her senses, the metallic tang of the IV solution, the soft beep of the monitor accelerating, the distant rumble of thunder that seemed to mock their efforts. She wiped sweat from Maria's brow, her own hands trembling now, determination warring with the urge to flee into anonymity. This was no simple delivery. It was a confrontation with fate, the storm's fury amplifying the internal storm of her guilt, pushing her toward a breaking point. In the midst of the chaos, the late revelation unfolded like a slow unraveling of shadows. Clara stepped back momentarily, her gaze settling on Eliza with an intensity that pierced the dimness. "You remind me of my sister," she said softly, her voice barely above the baby's fussing, as if the words had been waiting in the wings of her memory. "Lost her young to a house fire, just like, well, the scars on your arms." Eliza froze, the air thickening around her, the revelation hitting like a cold wave. Clara's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the raw edge of old grief, her tough exterior cracking to reveal the compassion that had drawn her to this life. She was overlooked too, always the quiet one helping strays. Thought she was invisible, but she had the biggest heart. The words hung, bridging the gap between them, redefining Eliza not as an intruder, but as an echo of loss the entire staff carried, the young lives they'd failed to save, the vulnerabilities they'd bandaged in others. Maria stirred, her fevered gaze shifting between them, the baby symbolizing more than new life. She was a beacon of redemption for these healers, a tiny heart pulled from the brink, much like the children they'd mourned in quieter tragedies. "You all, your family here," Maria whispered, her hand reaching for Clara's, then Eliza's, weaving them into a circle of shared humanity. The group, nurses, doctors, staff, hovered closer, their micro-reactions a tapestry of emotion, a doctor's nod, heavy with understanding, a nurse's subtle squeeze of Eliza's free hand, warm against the encroaching damp. Outside, the wind howled, but within, the emotional truth settled, transforming the rising tension into something profound. Eliza's guilt eased fractionally, the fire's shadow lifting as she saw herself reflected in their eyes, not broken, but resilient, her act of courage a mirror to their own overlooked compassions. The monitors stabilized with a final, steady beep, the medications taking hold as Maria's color returned, her breaths evening out. But the danger lingered, the flood's threat inching higher, sirens wailing closer as the town mobilized. Clara straightened, her voice regaining its anchor quality. "We're not out yet, but we've got you." She unclipped a spare hospital ID badge from her pocket, a simple laminated card with a lanyard, emblazoned with the staff emblem, and pressed it into Eliza's palm. "Wear this. You're one of us now." The plastic was cool, the weight symbolic, a quiet offer of belonging amid the hierarchy's embrace. Eliza's fingers closed around it, heart swelling with unfamiliar warmth, the gesture a thread of acceptance pulling her from isolation. As the team prepared to wheel Maria onward, staff lining the corridor in a hushed vigil, their applause soft like rain on leaves, Eliza walked taller, the storm's roar fading against the beat of communal hearts. The revelation had redefined everything, not just her role, but the humanity in these misunderstood guardians, their compassion a quiet force against the world's judgments. In that alcove, amid the beeps and flickers, redemption bloomed, slow and certain, binding the overlooked souls in a tapestry of quiet heroism. The corridor stretched like a vein, pulsing with subdued life, its fluorescent strips humming faintly overhead, casting a pallid glow that softened the edges of exhaustion on every face. Water still trickled along the baseboards, pooling in shallow mirrors that reflected the hurried steps of the staff, their scrubs whispering against the linoleum like secrets shared in the hush. Eliza walked beside Maria's bed, the hospital ID badge now looped around her neck, its lanyard a light pressure against her collarbone, a tangible weight of acceptance that grounded her amid the lingering tremors of the night. The baby's soft coos mingled with the steady beep of the monitor, a fragile melody underscoring the group's collective exhale as they navigated the turn toward the maternity ward. Maria's color had returned, her breaths evening into a rhythm that spoke of survival, though her hand remained clasped in Eliza's, fingers interlaced with a quiet desperation born of the ordeal. Clara led the way, her posture straight despite the subtle sag in her shoulders, the embroidered pin on her collar catching the light like a distant star. Behind them, the cluster of staff grew, a quiet procession forming without fanfare. Nurses peeling away from their stations, doctors pausing mid-chart, orderlies setting down carts to join. Their footsteps echoed softly, a synchronized cadence that filled the hallway with an unspoken solidarity. Eliza felt their presence like a warm current against the chill draft seeping from the storm-battered windows, where rain now pattered in lazy remnants, the wind's howl reduced to a weary sigh. The air carried the mingled scents of damp concrete and fresh coffee from a nearby break room, a human anchor in the antiseptic veil. Her heart, still racing from the alcove's intensity, began to slow, each beat a reluctant acknowledgement that this chaos had forged something enduring. As they emerged into the lobby, the space transformed before Eliza's eyes. What had been a dim, empty expanse at dawn now brimmed with figures, hospital staff spilling from side doors, their numbers swelling like a tide drawn by whispered radio calls and hurried texts. Doctors in white coats stood shoulder to shoulder with janitors in faded uniforms, nurses cradling clipboards like shields, even the receptionist from earlier, her glasses perched on her head as she clapped softly. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed steadily now, the generators holding firm against the ebbing storm, illuminating faces alight with a somber reverence. No cheers erupted. Instead, a wave of quiet applause rippled through the crowd, hands coming together in muted rhythm, like the patter of rain on leaves giving way to sun. The sound built gradually, enveloping Eliza in its warmth, each clap a thread, weaving her isolation into their communal fabric. Maria's bed rolled to a stop at the center, the wheels locking with a soft click, and the baby stirred in her arms, eyes blinking open to the gathered light. Eliza stood frozen, the ID badge swaying gently against her chest, its emblem, a simple caduceus, now a symbol of the belonging she'd never sought. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and unbidden, as the moral conflict of her past resurfaced, the fire's guilt, the orphanage taunts that had branded her unworthy, the instinct to fade into shadows. Yet here, in this lobby filled with the overlooked heroes of the night shift, she saw her reflection, not as a ghost, but as a quiet force, her act of courage mirroring their own hidden compassions. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on Eliza's back, the touch firm yet tender, her voice low amid the applause. "You didn't just save them tonight. You reminded us why we stay." The crowd parted slightly, allowing a path for Maria to be wheeled toward recovery, but not before hands reached out. Gentle brushes against Eliza's arm, nods heavy with understanding. A young nurse, her eyes red-rimmed from fatigue, murmured, "We all carry scars here. Yours just found its place." The revelation from the alcove deepened in this moment, Clara's words about her sister echoing in the micro-reactions around them. A doctor's subtle swallow, a staffer's lingering gaze, the way the applause softened to a hush as Maria was guided away. The baby, swaddled and serene, became the emotional symbol, a new life pulled from the storm's grasp, representing the redemptions each person in that lobby chased in their daily silences. Eliza's trembling hands steadied, the adrenaline's fire cooling into a profound warmth, her overlooked heart now beating in unison with theirs. Outside, the first rays of morning sun pierced the clouds, filtering through the lobby windows in golden shafts that danced across the tile, chasing away the last shadows of the night. The storm had broken, leaving the air crisp and cleansed, the scent of wet earth yielding to the promise of renewal. Eliza lingered as the crowd dispersed gradually, staff returning to their posts with quiet purpose, their hierarchy a seamless flow, head nurses directing, doctors consulting, the entire staff a living embodiment of compassion beneath the world's misjudgments. She touched the ID badge again, its edges worn from countless shifts, a medallion of acceptance that whispered of protection and family in this fluorescent-lit world. No longer running from her guilt, Eliza felt the quiet heroism settle into her bones, a slow-burn light against the darkness she'd known. In the reflective hush that followed, as the lobby emptied and the beeps of distant monitors resumed their steady vigil, Eliza stepped toward the doors, the sun warming her face for the first time in hours. The community had filled this space not with noise, but with hearts, unexpected allies in white coats and scrubs, proving that humanity thrived in the overlooked corners. Her path forward stretched uncertain, but laced now with belonging, the bullied orphan transformed by a night of storm and solidarity. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Eliza reach more people who still believe in humanity. The morning light lingered, a poetic veil over the hospital's weary form, where silence spoke of battles won in whispers. In the quiet heroism of that dawn, compassion bridged the divides of judgment, revealing the human threads that bound the vulnerable and the vigilant alike. Redemption came not in grand gestures, but in the steady beat of communal hearts, enduring against the tempests of life. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Bullied Orphan helped a nurse deliver a baby in a storm. The community filled the lobby for her. See you in the next one.